If the problem is global, can a solution begin locally? Is it possible for Australia to be a leading light rather than a following deputy? Australia, as a nation lacking a burden of colonial expansionist history, and a nation rightly absent a belief that its culture is big enough to dominate the world by force, has, in many times in its history, sought to assert its influence, in the words of Barack Obama, by asserting not the example of the power, but the power of its example. And what an example we are. Living in the world's most livable city, in the second most livable country on earth, perhaps our greatest failing is not recognising how much we get right. One of the great and most powerful things in Melbourne is the MCG. When leaving that ground next time, have a look at how many 12, 13, 14-year-olds are in groups unsupervised and ask yourself this: where else in the world could a 14-year-old girl rock up to mum or dad and say, "Hi mum, hi dad, I'm going to a mass public event with 100,000 people and no adult supervision." And mum says, "See you when you get home, dear." Where else in the world could that happen? In the MCG, it's one of those places where you actually feel part of a collective humanity. You have so much testosterone building up, yet there is peace and harmony. The ideal was after the drawn grand final last year. All those Collingwood supporters and all those St Kilda supporters, and then the final siren, and no one had won. Not the biffo that you see in Europe, not the flares that you see in Germany, but a Collingwood supporter turning to the St Kilda supporter and saying, "See you next week, mate." Where else in the world can this happen? Do we realise how good our society is in this country, and therefore how hard we must fight to protect it? Oh, how it would be if our leaders were like the Norwegian Prime Minister, who, in addressing his nation following those dreadful attacks earlier this year, held no fear in showing emotion, confusion and bewilderment at the assault, but he still stood firm in the resolute belief that one deranged person would not derail the openness of his society. I worked with Shaukat Aziz in Pakistan. He is a fine man and an example of a fine leader. He did a remarkable job as both Pakistan's finance minister and prime minister in circumstances so difficult that our leaders would not recognise. He was a deserving winner of that 2001 award. Whilst leadership through history is in some ways cyclical, with periods of greatness and periods of tenuity, we should hope for the former. In leadership, one remembers that no one has the monopoly on good ideas and no one is always wrong. It is therefore worth listening to others' ideas, and we should encourage leaders that can applaud the good ideas or successes of their opposition. Bob Hawke was the master of that. We must demand of our leaders to give credit where credit is due, build on others' good ideas in order to inspire us to choose between stronger and stronger, and not fear and fright. We used to have such leaders. We used to have men and women who spoke of lights on hills and held visions of communities of the community of nations ridding the earth of the scourge of war. They led using the strength of this nation. We were a leading people in the establishment of the United Nations, fights against apartheid in support of both people and in recognition of China. We led from this nation. We led with the power of our example. Paul Keating described Malcolm Fraser thus: "The unifying theme behind all Fraser's foreign policy was a pragmatic and independent search for Australian national interest. When speaking of Australia abroad, he was consistently informed, formidable and constructive. It takes character to give credit to an opponent. It takes leadership to set a moral course. We lost that with Tampa." When those 11 years ago we were asked, do we want those types of people here? Why couldn't we have said, people willing to risk their lives to work hard for nothing more than a better future for their children? Yes, we want that sort of person in this country. Wouldn't it be better if our national dialogue was one based on how to accept a fair share in a controlled and fair manner rather than how to keep the people away? Wouldn't it be great if we had a controlled entry policy rather than a border protection policy? The narrative is so important. The approach of stop or let is so important. Tampa was for this nation a turning point. It was when we stopped leading on the basis of hope and optimism and started inspiring through fear. Tampa began a change in our national culture. It challenged our national character, and we are yet to undo that damage. I, like many here, hunger and thirst for positive dialogue, intelligent dialogue, and challenging dialogue. In the words of Bobby Kennedy, each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of the rest, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from millions of centres of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. But few are willing to brave the disapproval of their fellows, the censure of their colleagues, and the wrath of their society. Moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence. Yet it is the one essential, vital quality for those who seek to change a world that yields so painfully to change. That is a big and inspiring idea, and we as a country can be as big as that. In preparing tonight's oration, I shared the draft text with a few people of different ages and sought feedback. One friend in her mid-20s from a politically active family emailed me, and she said this: I think that for many young people my age, it is not just that there is a lack of vision and leadership amongst our politicians. It is that they no longer believe that politics or politicians actually achieve real change. As a result of this, we have become not just politically disengaged from the main parties, but from the very issues they are actually discussing. Disagreement is one thing. Disengagement is worse. How bad will the future of our country be if we have a generation that doesn't even think debate is worth entering? A friend of mine at the older end of the spectrum responded saying, it seems to me much of the discussion and action in public domain lacks any generosity of spirit. Indeed, there is almost a grinding meanness to the debate. Business, on the other hand, seems to have grasped this and in order to survive has seized on rewarding loyalty as one of the key motivators to maintain custom. Enlightened self-interest, of course, good for all, yes, far-sighted, yes. But these are problems. Back to solutions again. Lindsay Tanner nearly got it right when he blamed the media, but let me put a refined view. We, as the consumers and creators of the media, must demand leaders frame the content of the debate in a way that strengthens the content of our national character, to give us not a choice of fear, but a choice of hope. When we read or hear ourselves repeat the negativity, remember the first step on rectification is to rectify ourselves. New media, new groups energised around issues and hope are tools that can be used to build much deeper community dialogue, not shorter sound bites. New media tools should be an opportunity for politicians to engage in longer dialogue of substance. And on this, I'm going to do a quick aside. I need to congratulate Adam Bant on one thing. Adam is conducting a refugee debate tomorrow and asked me to sit on the panel with him. I said, Adam, you've got to be aware I'm going to disagree with you on some issues. Here's what I disagree with you, and I sent it to him. Do you still want me on your panel when I disagree with you? And his answer was yes. There are many issues on which Adam and I agree. There are many issues on which Adam and I disagree. But the one I agree very strongly is we need to encourage debate and dialogue, and that's what he told me. So Adam, congratulations for that. There is hope with Get Up and other like mechanisms, but we need to demand that. The responsibility is ours. If you agree with me that we have a vacuum in quality political discourse in planning, immigration, emergency aid, education, global poverty, or whatever else drives your passion, then you have two choices. You can either sit back and lament the darkness or engage in dialogue, demand quality, and in doing so lean over and light a candle of hope. I have in this oration quoted Reagan and Bobby Kennedy. I have drawn from Obama. I've spoken of Fraser and Whitlam, Hawke and Keating. I've drawn on the leadership of Menzies, Curtin, Chifley and Doc Evatt. Could we imagine a day 20 years hence when quotes of current leaders were referred to not in lamentation but in reference to visions leading us forward, filling us with hope, inspiring us to dream, telling us of things to be done not because they are easy but because they are hard and require the leading of the power of our example? So back to the question from Rufus I started with. Do we get it right? How would I answer his question today, and more importantly, tomorrow? What is the content of our national character going to be? Rufus: I still have inherent faith that at the end of the day, we, the Australian people, can get it right. I believe that we want again to be inspired to dream, to debate great ideas. Now is the time for us to demand of those in power that they inspire us. And let us start our discussions from the point of strength that we now have. Our economic growth last quarter was 1.2%. Greece, -7%. Our unemployment near 5%. US, near 10%. We are in the ideal future time zone. This should be our country's golden age. Despite current equity market turmoil, this should be the time when we debate a bright future. Our choices should be ones of inspiration. But if we are not careful, instead of this being our golden time, it will be our lost opportunity. Instead of a time where we say yes, it will be a time where we say no, but we must reverse that. My core message is this: nature abhors a vacuum, and the time limit for the vacuum and quality debate has expired. Our country is not a negative one. We are known as the lucky country, not the grumpy country. We are not the whinging country. We are the one that gets on with it. Negativity is not part of our national character. It is us, though, who decides. We decide who leads us and the circumstances in which they lead. We can and we must make Australia positive again. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you. That was everything I thought it would be, and more. I did have a question. It was about social media and talkback radio. And I guess if we took a quick poll of who listens to talkback radio in this room, it would be low. And I think one of the things that I often think about, because I agree with you, this country has everything. My hero remains Nelson Mandela, and I grew up in a country that did understand difficulty and difference and separation. And this country does not have any of that. It has a democracy, and we appear to treat it lightly. And talkback radio treats it more lightly than almost anybody or anything I've ever heard before. And I would like to hear how you would persuade talkback radio for some of the fine things we've heard this evening. But moving on then, one of the roles of a university is to advance public knowledge. It is part of our commitment to creation, advancement, transmission, and the application of knowledge and skills. Those of us here tonight who have been privileged to hear this oration will agree that Mr. MacLeod's address has done exactly that. I am sure everyone in the room who works or has an association at a university was delighted to hear your comments regarding the international education market. We, and especially as a Vice-Chancellor, are much happier now with the night review outcomes and the Minister's response, which is to announce the streamlining of visa processing arrangements for international students, for reducing all visas to one category and not picking on certain countries. We will, of course, continue to work hard to ensure our universities are seen as welcoming places. We've never stopped doing that, and I agree with you to open the doors and to be seen to be welcoming and open for business, for education, and for fun would be a good start for us all now. I was also particularly struck by your call to arms to demand a choice of hope rather than the alternatives of fear. Universities and ones like Deakin have an eye on the future. We gaze at and over the horizon, and to fulfill our duties to our students and, of course, to the communities that we serve, we want to make sure that we provide them with the skills and the knowledge that will make them useful citizens of the 21st century. Universities should therefore be places that inspire people with a sense of their own capabilities and potential as successful contributors to our nation. And I think some of the things we've heard tonight that we, the Deakin and other university colleagues in the room, could easily take home to our places of education and begin to speak up. And perhaps no one has written as eloquently about the aspirations of a modern university and a modern society than the former Yale president Bart Giamatti. In his address, The Earthly Uses of a Liberal Education, he explained as follows, and I quote, "A liberal education has nothing to do with those political designer labels, liberal and conservative. A liberal education is not one that seeks to implant the precepts of a specific religious or political orthodoxy, but rather rests on the supposition that our humanity is enriched by the pursuit of learning. It is dedicated to the proposition that growth in thought, in the power to think, increases the pleasure, the breadth, and the value of life." Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure all of us here present will agree that Mr. MacLeod's address has provided us with much food for thought and inspiration for our own future endeavours. We are very grateful, Andrew, that you were able to be our guest to deliver the 2011 Richard Searby Oration. And please, on behalf of the University and of Dr. and Mrs. Searby, please accept this small gift.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this evening's event. I wish you all a safe journey home tonight, and I look forward to seeing you at the 2012 Richard Searby Oration. And of course, on the eve of our great religious festival this week, I hope your team wins, and I was astonished after the fact to realise that, of course, our orator this evening is a supporter of the other side. To my Geelong colleagues, I say, go the Cats. Thank you and good evening.